Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Eyes On. Happy New Year. Today we have the man, the myth, the legend, Alex Hollings from Sandboxx News and Air Power YouTube, the YouTube show Air Power, and of course Jason Lyons, former Marine, former CIA officer. Andy Milburn is, I think, traveling. He went to the motherland this during the holidays, and Mick Mulroy is just, doing Mick Mulroy stuff. I don't want to. We can't talk about it. He made us sign NDAs, so. The big news today that happened New Year's Day was the, I guess, terror attack in New Orleans. 15 dead, at least 30 injured. Army veteran, I'm going to fuck up this name, Shamsud Dinjabar, initially thought to have like people working with him and stuff like that, but that was eventually ruled out. ISIS inspired, converted to Islam last year. And before the attack, he posted a message on Facebook, I guess, announcing he was I didn't see the message or anything like that. So it was pretty hectic yesterday in terms of like when the news was breaking and stuff like that. Just theories flying everywhere. Initially they were like, oh, it's a guy from not a U.S. citizen. It turns out it was a U.S. citizen. And all intents and purposes, it seemed like the guy was like a normal dude up until about a year ago. So what are you guys looking at in terms of that? I just wanted to get people up to speed, even though I know people are, following this.
I got to be honest, I think that this is a big indicator and maybe an important lesson that we in the United States have not been doing a good job of learning. And that's that radicalization can affect anybody. Narrative management and information operations, especially the type that are aimed at radicalizing people, aren't aimed only at stupid people. To some extent, information operations are the same as marketing. And there's a reason why advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's because it works. And information operations work in a lot of the same ways. And this is a strong indicator of that. This guy was in the U.S. Army for over a decade. He deployed to Afghanistan. We're not talking about your traditional, the person that you would think a group would go after to radicalize, right? But we know he was going through some difficult financial times. We know he went through a very difficult divorce. We all go through really tough times. We all end up at sort of our lowest points at various times throughout our life. And at those times, we're most vulnerable to these sorts of efforts. Even if someone's not aiming them directly at us, it's easier than ever to find yourself in that pipeline through different kinds of content. So I suppose for me, with a background in studying perception warfare and information operations, the big takeaway for me here is that radicalization is not something that only affects, groups that are traditionally, it's not something that only affects low IQ people. It's not something that only affects people who are really gullible. It can affect anyone. And if you are in a position to be affected by this sort of content, it's really, really difficult to intervene, right? Because you need to identify what's going on, and you need to gain the trust of that person who. A big part of radicalization is isolation. The content aims to isolate you and then point you at, a common enemy, right? And I guess just the biggest takeaway for me is that if an Army veteran with 10 years in uniform, if, a guy who has a lot of things going for him, but is going through a tough time, can, in the span of a year, find himself in this position, I think that should be a reminder to all of us that none of us are above information operations, and we need to be thinking about and thoughtful about the content that we consume.
I agree, and I think to add to that, on a personal level, people knew him, people know him, so someone may have seen. I'm not going to say someone definitely did, but someone may have seen a change in him. I think I read this morning that people had said that his religious views had taken a huge turn, and he was becoming more and more extreme. So we in this country like to talk about the 22 a day, which we should talk about, the veteran suicides, things like that. But that also goes towards radicalization too. Someone may not be talking about ending their own life, but they may be talking about, they see something like this occur on TV and make a comment like, well, that's what they get, or in favor of that person. Those are things to take notice of. You don't necessarily have to go running to the police, but those are things that you need to take notice of so that you can intervene however that is. I just watched a documentary on PBS, I believe it is, about the shooter up in Maine, I believe it was, that he was former National Guard guy, or was a National Guard guy, and he killed, I think it was 8 people, some of which were deaf, from the deaf community. And the things leading up to that, his unit called the sheriff's department on this guy during a active duty deployment, because up to West Point, because he had gotten into a fight. He was saying all these weird things, but everybody from his son all the way up to his chain of command saw it. Nobody did anything about it. So along with being aware of information operations, people who are not targeted but are close to those people should be aware of the signs, and be ready to intervene.
That's such a good point, that I really do see a direct correlation between veteran suicide and veteran radicalization, because I think that they're 2 different symptoms of the same problem, right? Veterans who find themselves in a position that feels untenable, and they want to take action, because one thing that I think service members by and large have in common is a bias toward action, right? And that affects suicide rates the same way that it can affect attacks like this, domestic terrorism, right?
Yeah.
You find yourself sort of at your lowest moment and you want to do something that can fix it. And for some, that's violence toward themselves. For others, it's violence towards others. But I think you raised such a good point that these are sort of offshoots of that same mental health issue that we're not doing a great job of engaging with.
No, absolutely. And I don't know if you're going to talk about, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Alex, but even those whose lives look like they're picture perfect, I'm sure we're going to touch on it, the Las Vegas incident with the Cybertruck. This guy, 19 years SF, was a master sergeant, I believe. We don't know what his personal life was like, whether there was any kind of strife. I believe he was married. I think his wife, they said his wife had not heard from him in several days or whatever, but something was going on there. So us in social media land, we're like, oh man, this guy's, he's got it all. Master sergeant, SF, blah, 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 all this other stuff, but we don't know what
to look up to.
Right? Exactly. He's the guy we look up to. And this goes for, I'm saying guys, but gals as well. We look up to these people because, much like social media is is we see the good. People are almost never going to post the bad. So they're always posting the good. Hey, just paid, just bought my 3rd house, whatever it is. But we don't see what's below the surface. Whereas there are other people who do, whether it's a spouse, boyfriend or girlfriend, a child, even people. I used to do security for, I set up a security plan for a church I used to go to. And one of the things when we talked to the congregation, we said was, it's usually going to be the person you see every Sunday who has that one bad Saturday that decides to do something the next day. So that's when you take notice of those things. Hey, Jim, how are you today? And he's not talking. Or you heard he's having a divorce and he comes in. We had a gentleman who he ended up being removed, but he would come into the church and with his wife and children. And then all of a sudden he was coming into the church and sitting completely separate from them, and come to find out it was a domestic abuse thing. So you just don't know, and that's the kind of things that people need to be looking at before we get to the point that we did, yesterday. So
yeah. These special forces guys are, and you guys know better than anyone, guys, girls, humans. They're people just like us who have the same sorts of vulnerabilities that we do. Despite their immense amount of training and the incredible things that they've done, they're still people at the end of the day. And, the toughest people, have usually overcome some pretty difficult things. That's what made them the toughest people, and those things can pile up on you and they can sneak back up on you. I think everybody here can probably attest to when you go through something really difficult in life, when you lose people, you could be fine for 10 years and then it can come back, at the worst time while other things are sort of piling up on you. And, there doesn't necessarily have to be a catalyst. There doesn't have to be a divorce or your wife leaving you or something. Sometimes these things can just add up in such a way that you feel overwhelmed. And if there isn't an effective way for you to channel that energy, you're going to find one. And the ones that you find, especially online and, in this digital environment, more often than not, aren't necessarily good ways to channel that energy. Radicalization is a science. Dr. Ajit Maan wrote a book called Narrative Warfare for a think tank called Narrative Strategies. She was working with SOCOM a few years ago. That's how we met. And in her book, she talks about the radicalization process and how you wouldn't think of groups like ISIS or Al Qaeda as people who use psychology degrees to achieve their objectives, but they do, the very same way any other group might. And there really is a pretty tried and true process that you can put people through in order to radicalize them. That's not to say it'll work on everybody all the time, but if you put it out there often enough at high enough volume, you're going to catch people in that net,
Absolutely. Yeah. And these people, I think not the average person, but most people, when they think of radicalization, they think of some guy sitting somewhere waiting for, or they have a spreadsheet of people that they're going to cold call to radicalize. No, most of the time people come to them. They start searching the dark web. They go to forums and asking, hey, how does someone hook up with X? And then that's when, keyword searches pop up, or somebody will refer them, and then boom, hey, I heard you might be looking for a friend. Of course, they're not going to come right out and be like, hey, I heard you're looking for ISIS. It's, hey, I heard you, brother, I understand what you're going through. Sister, my boyfriend cheated on me, or I heard you came out and your community didn't accept you, blah, blah. And then, and these things almost never happen overnight. Most of the time it's a year for this guy. Most of these things happen, just like most intelligence operations, happen over a period of weeks, months, and years. So yeah, we don't know with the Las Vegas guy, but obviously something happened there.
You nailed it, because it starts with something that we all do a dozen times a day, which is like seeing a meme that makes you feel heard, that engages with your sense of identity and the community that you come by that meme from, whether it's a subreddit, whether it's a Discord server, whether it's an email chain for some older folks, the community that meme arrives to your doorstep on, and you feel heard, and you feel as though your grievances are being acknowledged. You're getting respect, or at least your grievances are. It makes you engage with that community that much more. And those incremental movements. It's the same way, like in true crime, they talk about how serial killers give themselves allowances. Like if you wanted to start, eating people, well, you're not going to start by eating people, right? You're going to start by following that woman on the bus, right? And then you tell yourself, it's not that big a deal. I left when it was over. But then the next time you don't. Right. And then you get progressively further along until you're willing to do things that otherwise might seem out of character. And this process works the same way,
Absolutely. Sorry, G, we kind of.
No, that was incredible. Yeah. I mean, the thing about, like, I don't know, the thing that really stuck out to me yesterday was when this happened, early in the morning. It's just the wildness that goes on in Twitter, like as you're reading, because like you want information right away, right? Like anybody else, and it's just people can't just relax and like get facts first before whether reporting about them or speculating about them, and like even speculating about them. Like if you're gonna speculate, this is speculation, right? Like
presented as such.
right, yeah, and it's just I was like scratching my head, be like. It's like we're being attacked by 100 cells from ISIS yesterday all over the country. It's never going to stop. Like, this is like a coordinated attack that they've been planning for years. And meanwhile, I mean, and at the same time, the FBI needs to do a better job in terms of messaging and stuff like that, because they're fucking horrible. Like, let's like the press conferences yesterday were a joke.
Yeah.
So they add to it a little bit, but again, like you put it into that Twitter social media world and it just spins out of control kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that they're parallels in severity, but we saw the same thing with the drones over New Jersey. You know, we had really poor communication on a government agencies, so people just filled in the gaps with whatever seemed sexiest to them. And the social media economy, the digital economy, is attention based, not credibility based. So the more engaging your take, the further the reach is going to be. And usually the more divorced from reality your take is, the more engaging it is. So, you know, Winston Churchill said that, you know, a lie will get around the world twice before the truth gets its pants on. It is, you know, a lie will get around the world 3 dozen times now before the truth will get its pants on. And then people don't want the truth, because the truth a lot of times doesn't align with like a, you know, a logical narrative. And we want logical narratives. You know, culturally, it's how we tell stories, but real life a lot of times doesn't sort of like engage in that same sort of cause and effect chain. You know what I mean? And so what people will see something that seems as though narratively it's not necessarily logical. Well, if lots of people are seeing drones, narratively, they must all be controlled by the same one person or one body. And if people are seeing drones, well, then maybe they're not drones at all. It must be this thing that's even more, you know, crazy, where in reality, a lot of what people saw were just hobby drones or even law enforcement drones. A lot of them were just airplanes and helicopters. But that narrative is not as engaging. And so because of that, people not only will ignore it, they'll attack it, you know, and you'll see the same when we're talking about, you know, a terror attack in New Orleans. We're going to see people who prefer the much more sexy conspiracy narrative over the possibility that there was a really troubled guy who, you know, decided to do something crazy, very likely was inspired by others who did things that were crazy. But the conspiracy may not extend much further than a half a dozen people, you know? But that's not the story that people on Twitter want, you know?
Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. To support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad-free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/theteamhouse.
And one of the, sorry, D.
No, please.
One of the foolish, but at the same time smart thing that people do, trolls on the internet do, is they inject their narrative that has nothing to do with it. Like I was just watching a story on the news, and they had a Republican pundit and a Democratic pundit, and they were talking about this. And one of them started talking about illegal immigration. And the host is like, well, we need to stop right there. You realize that this guy, both of them are U.S. citizens. Yeah, but nothing. One has nothing to do with the other. But people will inject that stuff because it riles up the base and it keeps them narrative that they want going. And again, that's not what, you know, we're trying to talk about here, but it's one of the reasons why
these white-haired influencers, that's what lawmakers increasingly are. There's you know, they want to get as many clicks and shares and likes. They want to raise money for the next election. They're not that worried about conveying reality. You know, it's not necessarily there's little incentive for a politician to err on the side of reality. You know,
which is kind of wild to me because, right, like their job first and foremost is like public safety, or should be anyway. And like they should kind of be the people that are the sobering kind of adults in the room. And they're not. And it's like, you know, pretty disheartening in terms of like being an American.
Not to bring it back to the New Jersey drones again, but it comes to mind because you see these lawmakers saying, well, they're not appearing on radar. They must be advanced technology. This guy doesn't know how radar works. The radar systems that we use, by and large, wouldn't detect low-flying quadcopters. That's not advanced technology. That's how radar works. But they don't know how radar works. So they're going to go make a statement, and every conspiracy theorist on Reddit is going to, you know, err on the side of this mayor who now thinks he's an expert in the electromagnetic spectrum, instead of like people who actually know how radar works. It's, you know, it's I don't know. I would say that we're in the most complicated information space age, you know, the era of the most complicated information space in human history. You know, we have no trouble looking back on the printing press and acknowledging how culturally changing the printing press was. The internet is that, you know, X times exponents. You know, it's given everyone a voice, and increasingly, you know, with social media and stuff, it's not even, you don't even need to have a built-in audience to reach a lot of people with your message. It just needs to be engaging enough, and that can work for better or worse, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, a little bit about the Vegas guy, Matt Livelsberg. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. He worked, both bombers worked at the same base or bases, or maybe two of them. They're trying to connect that on social media. And like, it is an interesting coincidence or, you know, circumstance. Like, I mean, but the fact is, Shamud, like, I'm sorry, I read his name wrong. Shambud did retire like 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And this guy was still, so if they did work together in the same base, which means like there's probably thousands of or tens of thousands of people on the same
Yeah, I think they
base.
were in Colorado Springs, right? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
NOLA. That's a pretty big installation.
Yeah.
So like, what are the chances like 10 years ago, they're like, let's get together and do this on January 1st in 2025, right? Like, so let's, again, everybody who's on Twitter, like, where's a conspiracy? There's got to be a conspiracy, because I've seen so many people, and again, to go back to that, where like they're here. They're here. I saw that like so from like agency, former agency people, where it's like, shouldn't you know a little bit better? Like, I know you're trying to be like a Twitter person and like a influencer now, but maybe pump the brakes a little bit.
Absolutely.
What almost worries me more is those people who know the game and are using it effectively.
Yes. Yeah.
That's even more dangerous than the people who are stumbling upon playing the game by just being idiots on the internet. The most dangerous ones are the ones who know exactly what they're doing, and they're not worried about second or third order effects. They're worried about their mortgage, and I respect that. I mean, I pay my bills through views in very much the same way, you know? So I understand the balance that you need to sort of maintain, where you're trying to get people to click on your content and you're competing against sensationalism and hyperbole. So I understand, you know, the trap that you can fall into. But if you know the game, if you've worked in countering the game, and then you're using it to your own, you know, for your own financial gain, I don't know. That's I don't like it.
It's like, crazy.
It is. It really is. I sent you something this morning, D, about, and you know me, I don't like to name names and stuff, but this influencer, former Special Operations Forces, I will just say that, posted something saying, basically, we told you, and named all these different guests that they'd had. We told you 50 to 60,000 Americans are going to die starting now, and that's the thing that annoys me, is they're taking what could be a bit of truth that could happen, but over 100, 200 year span, who knows, you know, or it could happen in this year. We don't know. And they couple it with lies, like saying this is congressionally funded, you know, these attacks and things, that kind of stuff. Like, if I was ever right in front of these people, the only thing I would say is show me the proof. I want to show the things that you're claiming. I want you to show me right here and right now that you have proof that these things, not because your guest told you, because most of these guests have said. What's that?
Yeah, don't tell me a guy said a guy said.
Yes, exactly. I have it on good authority, or I'm in touch with, you know, like, I'm going to say it. That guy who posted the videos about the drones in Jersey and was saying, I think they're, you know, sniffing for nuclear material, and a friend of mine had his hand on a rogue nuke and all this other stuff, is the same guy who finally admitted in his third video he's going to be running for office in 2026, and then the truth will come out. Well, if it's so important, buddy, why are you not telling us now?
Right.
If we really need to know.
Because you think a loose nuke would be like a kind of a big fucking deal.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's happened before. There's precedent we could look to for how they would handle it, and it wouldn't be by flying a bunch of drones at night.
Exactly.
You know, like, But again, we're speaking to that, and the gaps in the official narrative creates opportunity for people like that to inject their own truth. And again, because we want a logical narrative, we want a hero's journey story like we see at the movies. We will prefer that one because it fills in all the gaps very well. Whereas the true story, like the Las Vegas shooter a few years ago, who shot a lot of people. I forgot out of which casino. But we still don't know his motive. And honestly, we may never, because his motive may have been stupid.
Yeah.
It might have just been a dumb thing. But we have a lot of trouble grasping that idea, even though we do dumb things all the time, right? I do something stupid every day, and I like to consider myself a fairly bright guy. Now imagine someone with mental health issues who's been, down on their luck, who's, at the worst point in their life, and maybe has a predisposition for violence or something along those lines. You don't need to necessarily have a logical reason for the things that you do. Humans are big brain monkeys. We've got a lot of hubris. We think we're special, but we're animals, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. Honestly, not to go straight back to aviation because it's my area of expertise, but we saw the same sorts of things play out over this past week with China unveiling new stealth aircraft, where what we know about these aircraft is very minimal. China hasn't made any official statements about them, but you will find large creators on every platform claiming that it's hypersonic, claiming that it's capable of low Earth orbit, like stuff that is downright science fiction, especially for a nation, that up until 2017 was 3.5 decades behind the United States in stealth. Arguably, they're still a decade and a half, but now we're going to pretend that they've got suborbital fighter jets because people like that sexy narrative, and in the absence of real information, we're just going to make up whatever will drive the most clicks, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating in my position because I try hard to base a lot of my content is just looking at what people are saying online and going, okay, well, that's not true. Let's add some context. Let's add some nuance to this conversation, but that is not the way to get rich, which is why, I drive a used car and rent a house. But I am enthused by the fact that I do have a pretty sizable audience for someone who is a professional party pooper at this point. And, you guys too, you guys are another great example of you bring nuance and context to these conversations that people have without any expertise. People talk about the intelligence community and the special operations world, with all they've ever learned about it was stuff they read on Reddit, and you guys bring actual context to it and you have in-depth conversations, and that just doesn't pay as well as saying it's lizard people.
Yeah, me and Jack Murphy, host of the Team House podcast, we talk about it all the time, man. If we went and they'd started doing UFO stuff and sensational stuff, we would be, mansions and riding on jet skis and stuff like that. It'd be fucking nice.
And I wouldn't be fighting and scrambling for another 1,000 subscribers, every quarter or whatever.
Yeah.
Have 1 million, because they'd be like, oh, well, especially if you start with credibility like you guys have. And tomorrow, came out and was like, well, it's the fluoride in the water turned the frogs gay. It would blow up. It would blow up, because of your credibility.
Absolutely.
And it's a dangerous environment because everybody does have bills to pay, and it becomes a bit of a video game too, I think, for some people, where you've got 1 million followers, you want 2 million, you don't want to see those numbers decline, right? You derive self-worth from them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I work with other podcasts, and these two people that I work with, they have sizable Instagram followings, and like you said, they're so precious with it, and they have to grow and they have to continue, and I'm the same way with the Team House, right? I want to fucking blow it up. I see other podcasts, I'm like, they fucking suck. We should be better. We're better, and that's just a fact. It's not an opinion. It's a fact.
I agree. I'm a big fan of you guys, so I agree. Absolutely.
And it's sometimes it can be frustrating, but then it's good to take a minute and be like, yo, we're making podcasts. about information and stuff that we like and we're interested in, and interviewing great people, and we're getting paid for it. It might not be fucking tens of millions of dollars, but it's still pretty sick. You know, it's still pretty awesome. And we're doing it the right way. You know what I mean? Like with some ethics.
Yeah, honestly, that's how I have a much bigger following than I ever imagined I could get for being an airplane nerd. You know what I mean? Like I am living my dream, you know? So when I talk about like, you always want to grow, I don't know if I would want 1 million followers on anything, you know? It's stressful having a few 100,000 people paying attention to what you say, but I can also appreciate the romance of it. You know, we were talking before we came online about Nobelitis and like Nobel disease, like this idea that people who receive the Nobel Prize are told over and over again how smart and great they are, that, you know, as they get later on in life, they start to believe some pretty wild stuff. And I mean, I fall victim to it. I try my best not to. But with this New Jersey drone thing, I found a NASA program or at least it looked to be a NASA program that established a drone testing corridor between Delaware and New Jersey. And I reported on that saying, this very well could be, you know, what these drone sightings are. And then NASA called me and were like, you're wrong, dude. Like, we're not flying any drones. This program isn't managed by us. It's US Transcom now. You need to talk to them. And I had to go back on, you know, the next day and post another video because that video got a couple million views.
Right.
Made NASA pretty upset, you know. And I had
but
to go
Alex,
back
at the same time, it's not like you didn't say anything or doubled down. You came back and did a video.
That's the point. Exactly.
Most people are not doing that.
Yeah.
You've got to come back and say I was wrong.
Yeah.
And you're right. A lot of people aren't. And I guess maybe those are the two things that I try my best to keep in my work. And I think more journalists would do well to do the same. Is the first, admit that you're wrong. And the second is admit when you don't know enough about something to talk about it, you know? Like, you know, do your homework, try to be well read on as much as you can. But if you don't know enough about, you know, what's going on right now in Gaza, it's okay. I don't know enough, you know? And I think that that's something that the internet has kind of made everybody not as good at.
Yeah.
You know?
Agreed.
All right. So the Chinese J36, I guess they're calling it, or we're calling it that. You have a video coming out. When this comes out, it'll probably be right around it's coming out. It's coming out Friday, right?
Yeah, it should drop Friday afternoon, like 2:30, 3:30 time frame.
Okay, yeah. So this is working out perfectly. What do you got on that? Because that was the talk of the town, and I'm sure a bunch of like everyone at Lockheed and stuff were probably like, let's kick up this NGAD program again. You know what I mean?
That's honestly why that was the first thing I thought. So maybe a bit of context that's worth noting for anyone who isn't aware. The United States started working on a 6th generation fighter. 6th generation being sort of a stand-in term because we don't know what capabilities actually define 6th generation. It's just sort of marketing terms at this point. But the US started development on such an aircraft back in 2014 with a study commissioned with RAND called the Dominance Initiative. And that transitioned into the Next Generation Air Dominance program. The US started testing prototypes back in 2020. We know they set some sort of performance records. We don't know what, but we do know that there are 3 flying prototypes associated with this program, and the Air Force was supposed to deliver a production contract for it this year. But, you know, Northrop Grumman went about $80 billion over on the Sentinel ICBM program already, and they haven't built the first missile yet. So the Air Force doesn't have any money to fund this NGAD effort anymore. They commissioned another study over the past 3 months with third-party outsiders and a few industry insiders to see if the NGAD program is developing in the way it should, and they determined that it is worth the money. They just don't have the money. So they kicked this can to the Trump administration. They're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to basically increase the Air Force's budget to fund this F-22 replacement fighter, an air superiority fighter. So now fast forward to just this past couple of weeks. On the 131st anniversary of Chairman Mao's birthday, 2 stealth aircraft were photographed over China. One was over Chengdu, which is where Chengdu Aerospace Corporation is based out of. And then the other one was out of Shenyang Aircraft Corporation's headquarters. So this is sort of the Chinese equivalent of Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. These are not two aircraft from the same corporation. They're two aircraft from effectively rival corporations. But based on their shape and size, they don't appear to be competitors for the same contract. They appear to be designed for very different things. The Shenyang aircraft is much smaller. It may be unmanned. It might be their equivalent of a CCA drone, like the ones the US is developing right now. But then there's that J-36, that much larger aircraft with a delta wing shape. It really does look a lot like renders we've seen for American sixth generation fighters like NGAD or the Navy's programs called FAXX. Very similar concepts. They have a lot in common. But the thing is about this J-36 is that what we don't know about it is significantly larger than what we do know. We know that it's got a delta wing design, which suggests they're looking for larger payloads and much longer ranges. If you're familiar with the F-16XL, it was an aircraft that was tested back in the 80s. It was effectively an F-16A with a cranked arrow wing, sort of like a delta wing, but with two different sweep angles. And by adding all that extra wing area, they were able to take the same F-16 with the same engine and carry twice the payload about 44% further. And I think that speaks to exactly what this J-36 is meant to do. Its center fuselage looks a lot like the J-20s. Its nose stealth attributes look a lot like the J-20s. Its stealthy intakes on the bottom side look a bit like the J-35s, which are very Lockheed Martin reminiscent, for good reason. A man named Su Bin, a Chinese national named Su Bin, is serving a prison sentence for stealing the F-22 and F-35 blueprints for China. But this aircraft effectively looks like a J-20XL. It is a platform that's designed to fly at high altitudes, likely high supersonic speeds and over long ranges. And to that point, it has 3 engines, which is really, really unusual. There's inlets for 2 of the engines, the outermost engines on the underside of the aircraft. And then there's a third inlet for that center engine on the top. Now, there's people online claiming that that's a scramjet. It's not. There's no evidence to substantiate the idea that that third engine would be a scramjet. And to be honest, China's turbofan technology is lagging so far behind the US's that they just need 3 engines, 3 turbofan engines on that platform to move all that aircraft and its payload, would be my assessment. It looks like it's powered by WS-10C turbofan engines right now, which are engines designed for 4th generation fighters. These are the sorts of engines that would power, the American equivalent of an F-16, a non-stealth aircraft. They're still working on developing engines for 5th generation platforms like their J-20 and J-35. So this new aircraft is being powered by engines, from the 70s and 80s era technology wise, it's not, I guess, anywhere near as scary as a lot of content creators are making it out to be, but it's certainly got a ton of potential. That delta wing design, that lack of standing vertical tail surfaces means that it's very likely extremely difficult to detect using both high frequency targeting radar arrays, but also using low frequency early warning radar arrays. The lack of standing tails also makes it much more difficult to detect and target from the side. Whereas today's stealth fighters, that's more of a vulnerability. So while I'm not going to lose any sleep over the J-36 right now, it is worth noting that what we're seeing are the early test flights of a platform. So it's a half decade to a decade. The J-20 took 6 years to go from test flights to service. The J-35 now is probably going to take 14 years to go from test flights to service. So this aircraft's got a lot of maturation to go, and that's actually why I'm worried. Because it's a great design to start from to continue to mature the system into something that could reasonably pose a real threat to American air operations in the Pacific and to operations in places like Guam, further away than China could ever strike before. And to that point, there are people who are calling this J-36 a regional bomber program rather than a fighter. I think that that's a reasonable assessment to make, but I think people are making the mistake of assuming there's still a very fine and clear line between fighters and bombers, and that just isn't the case anymore. We're seeing with the B-21 Raider, there's really strong evidence to suggest that the B-21, America's new stealth bomber, will be able to carry air-to-air weapons to defend itself. Not to mention the feasibility that it could carry systems like DARPA's Longshot, which is effectively a cruise missile that carries AMRAAMs, so we can self-escort, things like that. So the line between an aircraft meant to engage other aircraft and an aircraft meant to engage ground targets is about as murky as they can get at this point, and it's only going to get murkier. So is it a fighter or a bomber? I would argue it doesn't matter.
Right.
Fighters can engage ground targets and air targets all the same, and this platform likely will too, you know?
So hopping back to NGAD really quick, until and unless that program is heated back up, do you think that what we have in the stockpiles are capable if something were to kick off right now?
That's the $1 billion question, right? So the U.S. is actively investing about $12 billion into upgrading our F-22 Raptor fleet, right? The Raptor is still the most capable air superiority fighter in the sky, but the Raptor started flying before the iPhone was invented. You know, this is a pretty dated platform in this 21st century, you know, rapidly changing digital battle space, right? So the Raptor is getting, it looks like a heads-up helmet Q targeting, which is a capability it has really lacked for a long time. And it's likely getting infrared search and track targeting capabilities. And that IRST, as well as the F-35's distributed aperture system, which can also infrared target, are really effective for countering stealth platforms. But the most important question we should be asking is, how is this aircraft, this J-36, going to be integrated into China's air warfare strategy, right? And chances are pretty solid, like NGAD, it's going to be a bit removed from the fight. It's going to serve as sort of a battle manager for AI-enabled drones, is what I would consider to be the most likely use case. And as such, it'll be a tough target to hit. It doesn't need to be the stealthiest aircraft in the world to be a tough target to hit, especially if it's pretty far removed and it's protected by CCA-type drones, you know? So does the U.S. have the technology to counter it? I would say absolutely, but circumstance depending, right? It depends on the environment you're in, the systems you have available, the circumstances of the engagement. There's a lot of variables to consider. And I was at NORAD and Northcom about a month ago, asking about these things and drone incursions and stuff like that. And one thing that the command element at the Space Force in particular really wanted to hit home for me was that China is not the Taliban. You know, people like to dismiss technology as made in China, especially because of their long history of intellectual property theft and sort of advancement through espionage. But they are a very well-funded adversary with a big and growing academic pipeline for, you know, aerospace, defense technology. We can't dismiss the threat that China poses out of hand because it's China. We have to acknowledge the fact that China is becoming much more capable than they ever have been in the past. And they don't need to be better than the United States at any one thing to pose a huge threat in the Pacific. You know, if the American defense apparatus is a suit of armor, you don't need to build a suit of armor that's just as good. You just need to build an arrow that can penetrate that suit of armor, right? So what we need to be worried about isn't, is China's suit of armor as good as ours? We need to be worried about, well, could this aircraft be one of those arrows? And I do think that it has the potential to be. And because of that, you know, and I've often called the shill for the military industrial complex because I do believe in winning the next conflict by deterring it. But I would like to see NGAD funded. And I think that seeing how serious China is about airspace dominance, it should be a clear decision. It should be, obviously, we need to maintain this advantage, because if you find yourself trailing, it becomes much more expensive and potentially deadly to try to close that gap, you know?
Gotcha.
Especially, China's airborne early warning and control apparatus is also rapidly maturing, and I would argue that that's the piece that they're missing when it comes to fielding these new aircraft. Last year or the year prior, F-35s and J-20s had a short interaction, a short encounter, and that was the one takeaway American pilots took from it, was that the Chinese J-20s are getting better at coordinating with airborne early warning and control. Those are the things people don't think about that America's so good at, because America operated stealth aircraft while no one else in the world did for more than 3 decades. The US has a commanding lead in establishing doctrine and procedure for these stealth aircraft operations. But again, we can't dismiss China because they are working hard to close these gaps, and they don't have to worry about public buy-in like we do in American politics. So if Xi Jinping thinks it's a good idea, that's it. They get the money they need. So I hope that the Air Force gets the money they need.
Yeah. And their money goes a longer way, right? Like their purchasing power.
The purchasing power parity. And it's worth noting that, people say the US spends more than the next 10 countries combined on defense. That is objectively false. Those are self-reported figures. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that a nation that is not particularly honest about anything also isn't honest about their publicly disclosed defense spending. So independent analysis suggests China spending $700 billion plus on defense each year, and their dollars go further. A colonel in the Chinese army makes less than a Marine Corps Lance Corporal with a wife in Camp Lejeune. So if you think of it that way, they have the means to produce a great deal of military capability. There are still elements of the Chinese military with horse-drawn carriages, but those don't necessarily matter if we're talking specifically about a naval and air power engagement over the Pacific. Again, they just got to build the right arrows.
Yeah. The Chinese equivalent to the B-21 Raider, the swept wing bomber. Yeah. What's going on with that? Do they have they've tested, but they haven't deployed?
So some people claim that they have tested the H-20. There were some rumors it was going to be unveiled last year. Current U.S. intel assessments suggest it'll probably be in the 2030s before it's actually unveiled. But it is, I would argue, probably more akin to the B-2 than the B-21 in terms of stealth and onboard avionics. But again, that doesn't mean that by the time it enters service, it won't have advanced, to a large extent. But I think it is worth noting that China has had access to American stealth materials through a variety of sources, including drones that have been downed in different places, the F-117 that went down in Serbia. They've got a lot to pull from to assess American stealth practices and material sciences, which are really, really important. And that's all going to inform the H-20. Radar absorbent materials are sort of under-discussed because there's not a lot of publicly available information. But that's sort of the skin on a stealth aircraft. And the radar absorbent materials, the RAM on the B-2, is supposed to be rated to absorb upwards of 80% of inbound electromagnetic energy, which is radar waves. That's huge. So, the shape of the aircraft is what really makes the biggest difference in terms of stealth. And from there, you're kind of making iterative improvements. But the material science of your composite skin is the next most important variable. The United States does have a big lead in this realm, but that lead is waning, and if China has access to, materials from the F-117 and then materials maybe from like the RQ-170, which is a much more recent ISR platform, a stealth platform, and they can see how those materials have changed, it can point them in a lot of the right directions.
Or that stealth Black Hawk from the Bin Laden raid.
Perfect example, perfect example, although it looks like the stealth Black Hawk was probably coated in the same have glass radar absorbent material used on some F-16s, some Wild Weasels. So I would argue the counter to that is ceramic-based RAM. There was a breakthrough a few years ago at a U.S. university in the South. I can't remember the school. Cheryl Zhu is the researcher heading the program. But ceramic-based RAM would be a revolution in stealth, unlike anything we've seen since the 70s, probably. It can withstand significantly higher temperatures. The thing that stops the F-22, for instance, from being faster is that the RAM we have today is polymer-based. It's plastic. And plastic burns in high heat and friction. And that's why you've probably seen pictures of like the F-22 with like blisters on its nose and like its skin kind of peeling off. That's because that aircraft was sprinting, for long enough to burn off the skin. Ceramic won't burn off like that. So not only can you sustain much higher speeds, but you don't need to scrape all that toxic stuff off your aircraft. They have to wear mop gear to do it. and then recode it and then recure it for 3 days in an oven effectively before the aircraft can get back out into operation. With ceramic RAM, it would last significantly longer. It would also make it cheaper to just coat everything in radar absorbent materials, which wouldn't make every F-16 stealth or whatever, but would reduce their radar return, buy you a little bit more time. So that is something that the U.S. certainly has in the pipeline. Cheryl Zhu's got a defense contract. Whether or not it'll manifest with 6th-gen fighters, is anybody's guess. But it's worth noting that the U.S. has been making moves to maintain its competitive advantage in this realm. They just have not been consolidated and funded into that singular NGAD program quite yet. And I do think that I think that there's a solid chance the Trump administration recognizes the value in NGAD, even if Elon Musk is dumb enough to think that quadcopters can replace crewed fighters, and for anyone out there who thinks that they can, quadcopters by their very nature are limited to low altitudes and short ranges. So you're never going to have a quadcopter swarm flying at 60,000 feet to engage enemy fighters.
Listen, there's a good chance Elon Musk was on ketamine when he put that out there. So
in his defense,
but it sounds great because it also made him think that the problem with targeting stealth aircraft is line of sight. When he was like, all you need is like a low light camera and AI. Bro, if you have line of sight with that stealth fighter, you are already screwed.
Yeah.
If you're an air defense system, the AAR-GM-ER, our new HARM, our new radar hunting missiles, got like an 80 nautical mile range publicly disclosed.
Yeah.
You are already blown up before you have line of sight, but I don't know. The dude knows rockets. I'm a big fan of Starship, but he does not know tactical aviation.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running out of time, but the next time we have you on, which will be soon, I definitely want to discuss the newest Chinese aircraft carrier and your thoughts on that.
I would love to. Honestly, people watching this might not know, but talking about airplanes with Jason Lyons has been one of my favorite things to do without it being a podcast. So yeah, anytime you want me, whether cameras are rolling or not,
Awesome.
Guys, don't forget to check out Alex Hollings. Like, you need this plug anyway. Sandboxx News, Air Power series on the Sandboxx YouTube channel. Of course, his journalistic work too. Sandboxx News. What's the website? Sandboxx.
Sandboxx.us. Sandboxx with 2 X's.us. Or sandboxnews.com, if that's easier to remember.
Okay, the link will be in the description. You can check out Alex. I'm going to put all of his links down there. You can find them. He's probably one of the best aviation YouTubers out there, I would say. At least.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the stuff I say, I parrot. Like the shit I was saying last week, it was just
same. I even got it wrong.
From Alex's videos, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, yeah, the J36 engines are a piece of shit. Like, they're not up to date. And I got that from you. Like, I'm not, what do I?
Yeah, if you ever want to do a deep dive into turbofans, I am happy to, but it might put the audience to sleep, but I'll be excited.
It'd be good. It'd be like ASMR, like after hour 2, you got to start going to sleep.
I'll talk about it
like
that.
Guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're listening to us on audio, rate it 5 stars. Subscribe there so you can never miss a download. Jason Lyons, all his links are in the description. Mick Mulroy description. Everything. Andy Milburn. Everything you need to know about this show is in the description. Stop asking me. It's always in the description. Just a little deductive reasoning goes a long way. Best way, and this is the most important one. The best way to support the show is patreon.com/the Team House. You get this show ad-free, and you get the Team House ad-free. So it's 2 podcasts for the price of 1. And yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks a lot. Happy New Year to everybody, too.
Thanks.
Likewise.